this workshop. We scheduled a meeting with a number of the other town boards that would be involved in this. We're all here like you to ask questions. This project, the developer has sought input from the town, and the project has changed a fair amount. So what I wanted to do was talk about some just basic procedures. The developer is going to make a presentation. The boards who are sitting up front, who will be having additional hearings, will ask questions. Then we're going to open up for everyone's questions. I think there's going to be a lot of questions, so at least initially, we're going to have the questions limited to 3 minutes. The only light that's working for the broadcast is here, so if you've got a question, come up here. We'll obviously keep going until all the questions have been answered. There are a number of additional meetings that are going to be held. It depends on what the project is. The last presentation included a tax incentive financing agreement. That requires town meeting approval. That requires approval and negotiation with the select board. So one of the things I'd like is each of the boards that may be involved going forward to briefly describe, depending on what the project is, what the opportunities are going to be for additional review and input from everyone in town. John, do you want to start off with the planning board?
Sure. So I'm John Higley, from chairman of the planning board. As Chuck said, depending on the type of project, start with what's by right. But if we look at two basic parts of it, the 41 North Main parcel and the side that's on the west side of the tracks going up Hunting Lane side. On the 41 North Main, there's what's by right is it's in a residential zone, and they can put some houses there. If they want to use the PUD function, it's part of that's in business general that allows them to do some things on that site. The PUD requires a special permit, so that process is that to apply for a special permit, it goes to the planning board. There's hearings. There's a hearing, and that's that process. If they want to change the PUD, which in the developer's past information says they would like to change the size of the retail space, there's a limit of 2,500 square feet. They'd like to change that. That's a zoning change. So that would require a zoning change. That means public hearing, and it means it goes to town meeting. It goes through all the process where a warrant article is considered. It means it goes to advisory, to their hearings, the planning board hearings, and then it goes to town meeting, and it requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting for that to pass. So to change the PUD square footage limit requires a town meeting vote. Let's see, but within that they can build a building in the business general part of that land without using the PUD if they wanted to. It's awkward. They could do that with just the same way you build a house, goes through that process. For the land, for the Hunting Lane land, if the development on the Hunting Lane land, depends what type of development. Part of that's zone with 2 acres, part of it's zone 1 acre, and you can put houses on those sections with all the same rules and regulations that apply, including conservation, the Board of Health. It requires, I'll let those groups define that, but it means got to obey the wetlands rules, septic rules, and those require permits. So it goes through all that process. If they want to change change the zoning, that's a zoning change that would require going through a planning board hearing, and then it goes through the same process for any warrant article, goes through advisory hearings, and then it goes to town meeting, which requires a 2/3 vote. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? I think that's the process. So there's a lot of places for these things to have public hearings. And I'll say this, that when there's a big project like that, as the planning board has already facilitated this type of meeting, I'm anticipating there'd be more, because we're all here to see the latest and discuss it. There's ample time for continuation of these types of hearings. The planning board has published some frequently asked questions from the October meeting we had on this subject. And the planning board has given the developer some feedback, which you'll see some of that incorporated into this presentation.
Great, thanks, John. And obviously, any of those changes that would require town meeting approval, the select board will be involved in, as well as advisory in scheduling that and in holding the meeting. Neil, do you want to, I suspect your answer, Neil Kessler from the Conservation Commission, I suspect your answer will be the same. It depends on what the project is. But you want to address that? That'd be helpful.
Sure. Just go stand up there. So coming back to the wall. Just kidding. So I just wanted to say that this is a little bit impromptu, but we've shared some initial comments and feedback to the select board about some of the issues that might concern the Conservation Commission, those issues being centered around wetlands and jurisdictional areas, which are buffer zones around wetlands. So as Chuck was saying, a lot of that does depend on where the projects are, but generally speaking, there's, the things that are going to come under our regulatory jurisdiction, things that will receive notices of intent about or applications for work within our jurisdictional areas are likely to be any kind of construction work that's within 100 feet of a buffer or 200 feet of a river or something like that. Originally for this project, they were looking at a public water supply sourced behind 41 North Main Street up toward Hunting Lane. I don't think that's progressed, and I don't know if it will, but that's an area which we'll obviously sort of have jurisdiction over and study and understand the impacts of. I know that there's been discussion about public water supply either potentially at the end of Morse Road, also Farm Pond. Those are also either potentially jurisdictional areas and or conservation land. And so again, we would have some oversight with that, trying to identify what the issues are, volume of water that's going to come out, how that might affect public and private drinking water supply in the sense of volume and quality, which does bleed over into Board of Health, but that's also an interest of the Wetland Protection Act at state level and also our local interests. Also collectively, wastewater and where it goes, what contaminants are removed, what ones aren't, how those might get into wetlands and affect the interests of the Wetland Protection Act and our local bylaws. So a lot of this stuff is going to revolve around hydrology, water quality, water quantity, and those kinds of issues in jurisdictional areas. So without any more sort of definition of what the project is, those will be things that we'll be looking at. Those are things that we will regulate as the projects and the pieces of the projects that are relevant to our commission go forward. So.
Great, thanks, Neil.
Yep.
Karen, she's coming. Is there somebody from the Board of Health that wants to respond to the same question? I don't see anyone here, so without further ado.
I'm Dave Sutton. I am a member of the Board of Health,
Great.
but I want to defer to Daryl because I think she's been there. She is.
Daryl, time's everything. Just to ask, before the presentation starts, we're asking the various boards that have or may have jurisdiction over the project to briefly describe going forward what would be involved, what opportunities there will be for the boards to review the project and for the public to ask questions in public hearings. I hate asking you this since you just walked in the door, but...
Spur of the moment. Okay. Depends on what the project is going to look like.
Yeah, I think we've heard that 4 times. Thank you.
Okay. So that would be the main thing in terms of whether...
You might come up to the mic. I'm sorry, Daryl.
I have to shift my brain from work to this.
Thank you. Give me 30
So,
seconds, thank
do I turn this around? Do I just
There you
stand
go.
here?
Perfect.
That works, okay. Okay. So it depending on the size of the project, it could fall under Board of Health jurisdiction for the water supply and/or the wastewater treatment. And then we would somewhat follow our usual regulations, although this would be a project that's not just a single-family residence, and we have extra requirements for that kind of thing. You can let me know if you want me to go into details, but I'll skip that for now, but happy to fill in at another point. If it falls under the jurisdiction of the DEP as a public water supply, and if the wastewater treatment plant is managing 10,000 gallons or more of wastewater, then there's a whole separate set of regulatory requirements for that. I do think it would be, and I believe the Board of Health feels it would be in the town's interest to look more closely at either of those, because for public water supply for the DEP, they often ask that there are requirements to test surrounding wells to see what the impacts will be of the draw from something like that. We would just want to make sure that they are asking for an appropriate number of tests for an appropriate length of time for that. So that might be something that we'd weigh in and advise the DEP, because they're not familiar with every town, and it's not so common to have a public water supply surrounded by so many residential wells. So that is an atypical situation. So on the wastewater treatment side, there are also requirements. So when the DEP, they have some rules about how a wastewater treatment plant should be set up and operated, although there's a lot of discretion for the designers to design as appropriate to meet target standards. Those standards don't cover a lot of things that we may be concerned about drinking in our water. I don't know if people have heard about contaminants of emerging concern. They're a big concern to people in the environmental realm. Nobody knows what to do about them because they are so varied, they're new. It's on everybody's radar. I don't think there are too many in the environmental field who would think that that is not something to address. We just don't know how to address it yet. So the town may want to consider that moving forward, because we do have a situation where we are discharging into the ground and drinking from the same area. And that is not, I think it's typical across the country, but it's typical for more rural areas than where we are. Also, the DEP has requirements when they're looking at the discharges from a wastewater treatment plant that they regulate to take into account where the public water supplies are in the area. We have private water supplies in the area, and those are not always covered under those regulations. So again, I think the town may want to look at, we're going to be operating this. It's going to be our responsibility, our liabilities to have that thing perform properly so that we're not negatively impacting people's health and or their property values. We may want to go beyond because we have a different situation than the norm. So, is that an okay summary?
That's great, thank you,
Okay.
Darren. You can actually put your things down now. A little bit of housekeeping. Concom now has a quorum. The select board has been in open session since 6 o'clock. I'm sorry, 6:30, we had an executive session, so if you want to call your meeting down.
Sure. Just February 14th, 7:15, calling the Conservation Commission meeting to order.
John, are you already in session?
We're starting a new one, so the planning board is now in session.
Housing partnership, we have quorum as well, so housing partnership is in session.
Terrific. Andrew, are you doing the presentation?
All set?
We're all set too.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome, thank you for coming tonight on a special night. Should I speak into the...
Yeah, close to a microphone.
Can I bring it over here? So-
Yeah, that's what I'm not sure that the mic is working. We've been having...
I don't think it's working. I'll speak loud.
The mic doesn't work for the audience in here, but it's working for the people at home.
There we go.
Interesting.
Yeah, let's all go home.
Should I raise, is this good enough, or should I raise the...
Just loud.
Loud.
You're blowing my ears up, but that's okay. I got it now.
You got it,
Yeah.
okay.
Is this mic over here working?
I think there's a problem
You
with
speak in the mic, they'll hear you at home. They're not going to hear you in this room.
I'll
You
speak
have to
very loud,
Yeah, that's not working either.
and if I don't speak loud enough, please let me know. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Is that? Okay.
Come into the middle.
Yeah, come in the middle of the room.
How's this?
Great.
Much better. Great. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for coming tonight on Valentine's Day. I know this isn't the most greatest night to be here. My wife is pretty upset with me as well. So, but we'll kind of go through the same process as we have in the past presentations. I'll introduce myself again for people who don't know me. Andrew Consigli from Civico Development. I'm the development consultant, helping Gary Labarsky and his brother Dan, work in this project and gather input and feedback and shape the development plan and also the infrastructure possibilities in partnership with the town that we have been proposing. Also Pam Brown, our legal representation, is here as well. And so we'll get right into it. Gary, I'll just tell you to flip it and we'll go into the presentation. And then in terms of...
Can everyone hear Mr. Consigli?
Not well.
A little louder.
Okay. Asking questions. Should I go through the entire presentation and then take questions?
Yes.
Okay. So new information from our last meeting. Our last meeting was on January 17th. And so we have an updated development plan that we have gathered more feedback and input, particularly from that meeting, and also talking with folks in town. It continuously is evolving, and we plan on continuing to evolve the plan based on the feedback that everyone is giving us. So we'll be showing that updated plan tonight. We also looked at other development proposals and options, not just in the past month, but also before that we wanted to show you. So we have been looking at many options throughout the past 2 years. So we'll share some of those options with you guys, with everyone tonight. Also architectural views and what the scale of the buildings and architectural style could be. Again, that's something that will be driven by everyone's input and be shaped continuously throughout this meeting and the following meetings. And then we've went over this previously in the last meeting, but we'll revisit it, the partnership outline with the town in partnering to do a town center municipal water and sewer treatment facility. And we've also received harder estimates, more accurate estimates from contractors. So we have a better idea of exactly what the scope is and the potential costs. And then finally, we have launched an informational website that we can talk a little bit more about, but we have an FAQ document on there that we're going to continuously update as we receive more questions. And there is a comment box on that website that you'll be able to submit questions and we'll be able to answer them for everyone to see. So those are the new elements that we're going to be going through tonight. Am I speaking loud enough? Great. So next slide. So the development plan, I'm going to go a little bit here because it's hard to see.
Dim the lights a little bit.
Yeah, you want to dim the light? Can we dim the lights a little bit?
The lights.
Great. So I'll explain the updates to the plan and what has changed. Generally, the east side of the tracks here. This is the tracks, the railroad tracks are right here to orientate everyone. This is the east side of the tracks and the west side of the tracks along Hunting Lane, which is along here. So you have North Main Street, Route 16, and this is the Heritage right there. And the idea is that this is the historic house, and we would be attaching to the historic house a food market. And then within the historic house would be a restaurant, cafe, and the food market would be attached to that and be in scale with the historic house. Here, this piece of the development here would be assisted living and memory care. And that would be the driving factor in being able to support the infrastructure that we're proposing for the town center. We can get a little bit more into this afterwards after I explain the rest of the development. And so this parcel here is totaling 7 acres. Pretty much flat except for a hill right here that we would knock down and make the site much flatter. We would not touch any of the vegetation and trees, existing trees along North Main Street, and this is about a 100-foot setback to that memory care. And the idea that this would be 1 to 2 stories for the memory care, and then back here it would go to 2.5 stories for the assisted living. The Hunting Lane side of the project, this is Hunting Lane here. It would be a cluster of 10 homes here, and then 11 would include the existing house down here. And these would be single-family homes in a cluster environment, and the road and driveway leading back to an existing single-family at the back of the site. Wetlands take up about 25% of the site here. And that will be left, obviously, and be working with conservation on that as well. Go to the next slide. So in a large version of the east side of the tracks, where it's the assisted living, memory care, and market and restaurant. This is the signalized intersection currently that would be improved to handle the entrance into the development. So you'd enter the development here and be able to park in a court behind the historic house, which is right here, and the new food market here. And so what's generally nice about, urbanistically, what's nice about this plan is that the parking is all hidden. Where a lot of typical developments and strip malls, you have the parking out front and then the building behind, so you see a sea of parking. And so so you would come in here to park, and then this would be the memory care here, and this would be 1.5 stories. And then it would continue into the assisted living, and the assisted living would have more beds and would be 2.5 stories tall. So that's 3 floors, but an attic expression on the 3rd story. So it would be 2.5 stories, architecturally speaking. You'd have courtyards and landscape gardens within these spaces here. And again, this is about a 100-foot setback from North Main Street, and that would essentially provide a good buffer and keep the existing trees that are there. And generally, the scale of the buildings of this here is all 1.5 stories, so it's in keeping with the residential feeling of the town center. And then the height that we're proposing is back more towards the tracks. Can we go to the next slide? So this does go back to the last meeting that we had on January 17th, and this here is what we proposed, very similar to what I just talked about previously. Before that, on July 11th, September 6th, October 25th, November, those meetings that we've come in and presented, we had a slightly different plan, and I want to talk about why this plan has evolved as it has. And so on those previous meetings back in July, starting in July to November, we had an assisted living facility of 120 beds. The restaurant and market, we had 25,000 square feet, and we had Hunting Lane undefined. We didn't address the density or what use and what was going to be on that site at that time. We were really concentrating on the commercial piece of this in the east side of the tracks. The next meeting, last meeting and this meeting, January 21st and February 14th, we changed the plan, and I can kind of talk about why we increased and decreased and moved the plan around to where it is now. So the assisted living facility is now 110 beds. We added a memory care facility of 50 beds, so you get a total of 160 beds. We reduced the restaurant and market down to 15,000 square feet, and we also defined what is along Hunting Lane with single-family homes. So the next couple slides will explain how we got there and the reasons why we went in this direction. So you can go to the next slide. So between between the November 25th meeting and the January meeting, we met with the planning board and talked about how can we incorporate affordable housing into this plan. And so what we proposed is 2 buildings, here and here, and what we did is we removed the retail component because the retail, we had some studies done, and the retail doesn't economically support the project. So by adding affordable housing, it helped with the town's affordable housing goals. So we proposed to the board to incorporate 2 buildings of about 50 units, 50 apartment units at 25% affordable units, so all the units would count towards the SHI. And then we moved the restaurant and market up in this area along North Main Street. And we kept the assisted living operator in the same place, and we reduced it down to 90 beds. And then we, and the idea for this is, if you look to the left, this is the Hunting Lane parcel here. We initially had the idea of putting townhomes on this land, given that it's 40 plus acres, 30 acres if you give buildable area minus the wetlands. And so this is Hunting Lane right here. This is the existing house way in the back, and you would come in and you drive through, and then these would be clusters of townhomes. And so the feedback we received was that was very dense and something that we should rethink. And this is all economically driven. And we'll get in a little bit more about the numbers, about the infrastructure, but a lot of these decisions that are made are because we're trying to make the project work financially for the town, for us, and even to have the project be able to work for investors that would invest in the project, or else there wouldn't be a project. So, next slide. So we also looked at some other options as well. The one on the top here, so I'll kind of orientate everyone. This is North Main Street here. These are the tracks, and then this is the Hunting Lane parcel here, with Hunting Lane right there. We kept one option here is we kept the market and cafe in the same location, the assisted and memory care in the same location, but we added single-family homes to the front along Hunting Lane, and then townhouses towards the rear. That's one idea that we had. The other idea was to actually flip the assisted living over to the Hunting Lane side and put more of the townhomes and in the residential component along North Main Street, very similar to what we see now with 59 North Main Street and Abbey Road, to have it more fronting the road and closer to the town center. This would put more of the passive use towards the back, but it would also move more of the density in larger buildings on the Hunting Lane parcel as well. The other version here, this is just taking a piece of the east side of the tracks, would be to change the assisted living to all market rate, 25% affordable units, while keeping the market and cafe. So we went through a bunch of different versions, and that's sort of where we came out with the current version now is, you can go to the next slide. This is a sort of a very conceptual sketch of the architectural style and the scale of the buildings. So this is the plan at the bottom here. This is North Main Street, and so this view is right from North Main Street, looking at the market, which is right here. So this is the historic house, and then this would be the attached market. These are the existing trees, and actually there's a lot more of them, but that would block all of the buildings, so I took them out. We're not knocking them down, they're just not in the rendering. This would be the 1.5-story memory care, and then back here towards the back of the tracks would be the 2.5-story assisted living. Now, I'll kind of go through each component, keeping the rendering up as we go through some of these slides to talk about the scale of each of these buildings. Next slide. So the memory care, which is right here fronting North Main Street. Abbey Road, which is a very successful project. A lot of people I've heard like the architecture and the scale in town. It seems like it fits in very well. Haven't heard too many complaints about it. That would be the scale of the memory care, 1.5 stories fronting North Main Street. This is a project, memory care and assisted living facility in Ipswich. Again, 2 stories. Very farmhouse, country-like. I think a very well-designed project. These, I'm not saying the project's going to look exactly like these, but this is the scale and the potential to do a very nice quality in-scale project in the town center. Next slide. The assisted living in the back, you can see it through the trees here. Sort of has a red bottom and then also has clapboard siding on top, cedar shingle siding. So I wanted to point out one of the buildings in the downtown area. I think it's 43 Main Street, the office building back here. That's 2.5 stories. Very similar in scale to what we're proposing at the back of the site. I tried to take pictures of it, but it's actually hidden by a lot of the trees. But it's very well done, and it's in scale with the rest of the town center. This is a Sudbury building that I drove by the other day. They're apartments, and it's 2.5 stories with a 3rd floor. This is the scale that we're talking about for the assisted living. And then this is another project, I believe in Wayland, assisted living, 2.5 stories, 3 floors. Again, this is the type of scale that we're talking about. We're not talking about large, 5-story buildings in an urban environment. We're talking about, these are buildings that have been built in other towns in a very good sort of scale and quality that fits in those towns very well. And that would be our goal here as well. So next slide. And then the market and restaurant. Throughout the process, we've heard probably the most from people about is having a restaurant, another restaurant in town, and also a market, a food market. And so we would like to put this right along North Main Street, attached to the historic house, and create a very sympathetic addition to the historic house. And some of the ideas here is this is a market, again, this is to explain the scale that we're talking about. This is down in the Pine Hills. It's an old barn. Well, it's a new barn, but it's supposed to look like an older barn. But that's the market, the Pine Hills. I pointed this out before. This is the stone kitchen up in, was it Stone?
Stonewall Kitchen in Maine.
Yes, that's it. And same scale, but they built onto a historic house there, and it's a very well done building in scale with the historic house. And then right next to us is the Heritage, same scale. It's 1.5, 2 stories, and that would be this component right here. And we feel with the market and the restaurant right along Main Street, it's going to create a lively. People can be walking. You could have a cafe out here with sort of these large doors opening up to Main Street. I think it could be a great addition to the town center. So we can go to the next slide. So this is this is before we started down this process of proposing a municipal town water and sewer. We were working with a traditional septic and wells proposal. And we were talking to a memory care facility, and we came up with a plan that would be not utilizing municipal town water and sewer. It would be just doing our own well and septic system, like a Presby septic system, very similar to what we have at Abbey Road. And so this was the memory care facility. It would be 2 stories. This is North Main Street, again, to orientate everyone. This is the historic house. And then this would be the market there. And then this would be some more shops. So this was the 25,000 square feet of retail and restaurant. And then we were going to do 80 beds here in this location. And then the well would be across on Hunting Lane. And then the septics would be in this location. Septic field would be in this location right here.
Is that pointer working?
Yeah, pointer off.
It might be because I'm not straight on that.
Yeah, I can't see that.
Can you?
Where is it?
I think because I might not be straight on the screen.
That's not doing right.
It was working.
It was.
It wasn't. It's not working.
Just working on my hand. All right, I'll try to explain as best I can. Unless somebody has a point. Ready to go? Thank you. Wow, there we go. want me to start over? Should I start over?
Start that whole thing over.
So this is the memory care facility, 80 beds, 2 stories. This is a historic house. Well was going to be across on Huntington Lane, and then the septic field was going to be back here. We abandoned this plan because at the time, because we came up with the idea of we've heard from some of the leaders in town and other people that there was a need for a public water, municipal water and sewer system for the town center. So that we kind of went in a different direction, and that's where we are now. We're proposing something different, a partnership with the town for a municipal water and sewer system to feed our development, but also the greater town center. So next slide. So partnership to bring municipal water and sewer to the town center. We went over this last time, but I want to go over it again. Kind of 4 steps. Developer builds town center municipal water and sewer. $3.2 million in cost. It would cost the town much more than that if the town built it because of procurement laws. And so the idea is we have received estimates, construction cost estimates, and we can go over that in a little bit more detail. But generally, we would be building the system. Second step would be developer finances the cost through a construction loan. Third is the developer transfers ownership of the water system, the municipal water and sewer, to the town of Sherborn. And then the developer receives those costs back after 10 years through a TIF, tax incremental financing mechanism. And so we'll kind of go through that a little bit, but those are the 4 very simple steps to make this possible. Next slide. So town infrastructure costs, and we can make this public, but these are some of the letters and costs and estimates that we received. Generally, it's going to cost $3.2 million for both the water and the sewer. There has been some talk about this being $8 million, there's been some talk about being much less, but generally we feel pretty comfortable with the estimates that we received through our engineers and outside construction companies, essentially, that bid on the sewer work. Next slide. So we talked about this before, but we'll go over it again. The benefits to the township. We want to make sure that this doesn't come across like this is just for us. I mean, we want to build a development here. Gary owns the land. He sees a vision here, and a market and assisted living, and the homes across Huntington Lane. But we also see this as a huge benefit for the town for their tax base, for your tax base, and add vitality to the town center, and just for health reasons. So I just kind of want to set that up first before we go through the other benefits. So commercial tax revenue that increases over time to full value after 10 years. The future tax revenue from the other businesses in town once this system is in place. Those businesses can improve their situations in town, and we feel their values are only going to go up as well. The local food market that incorporates historic house. The town also receives the municipal water and sewer for the town center district. It also provides a healthier drinking water to town center due to all the current setbacks, septic setbacks. And it also creates opportunity for business district to evolve into a more vibrant downtown. So these are the points that we're making that we feel that it really does benefit the town of Sherborn. Next slide. The approval process for development, I think we went over this a little bit, John. I think we went over it. But the idea would be to have a town meeting vote in June of this year. And we would be voting on the TIF for the assisted living over a 10-year period. We'd also be voting on the zoning change from 2,500 square feet to a 9,000 square foot market. And then the other is a special permit to do a PUD, plain unit development, that for the 7-acre parcel along North Main Street. That would include the assisted living, the market, and in the restaurant, and the memory care. Next slide. Finally, we did launch a website. We're asking for more community input as we go through this process. It's www.sherbornsquare.com, and some of the elements that you'll see here is we do list the community benefits. We talk about the actions needed to make those community benefits happen. We have a FAQ, frequently asked questions sheet, that we're going to continuously keep adding to as we receive comments from this page here. So go to Contact Us, write your question, comment, feedback. We'll post that as a question. We'll answer it. So there's a back and forth between us and even the people that aren't able to come tonight. This is a way to get that interaction, community outreach between us. So that's generally what our presentation tonight. Again, there's going to be many more presentations, I believe, and we hope that you'll offer more input so we can keep driving this forward.
Let me ask questions. Can you put on the screen what, because you had a lot of options, the development as you're proposing right now?
Yes.
Can you repeat Eric's question?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Eric wanted to have the development that is currently proposed on the screen so we can talk to it during the questions.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yep. And I'm going to, including the town boards, I've got a handy dandy timer here. Let's try and hold ourselves to the 3 minute as well. So, ready, Paul?
Oh, can I just step back one second before you speak? So the idea of the TIF is last time we were here on January 14th, 17th, I think it is. One of the selectmen asked us to come back with more information about the TIF and if it actually works. And we have been doing work on this, and Pam's here to talk about it a little bit more. So as that question comes up, which I'm sure it's going to come up, we'll be able to offer insight and answer that question and provide more information. I didn't want to forget that because that was one of the tasks that we had to do. So, sorry.
My question was, where is the water coming from and where is the septic system going to? That wasn't part of this presentation.
Yes, and sorry about that. In the past presentations it was, and I didn't want to continue to talk about that, but I'll point it out right now. So the septic fields would be under the ball fields here. There is currently a septic system for the Pine Hill School right now, and the idea would be that we would put in a system, the leaching fields, under the ball fields, and we would actually be redoing the ball fields, so you'd have new ball fields after, better ball fields than we do now, and you wouldn't even know that there are leaching fields underneath it. That's how at least we feel. And it's been done previously before in terms of, septic systems under leaching fields under playgrounds. It's a very safe thing that our engineers, have engineered. But generally that's where the leaching fields will be. The water, we have been talking to, there was a task force in town, and we talked about Morse Road as being the location for the well. And Gary, you might be able to talk a little bit more about this, but that's generally the place for the well. And then that would be brought into the town center, the water essentially.
Pipeline.
What's that?
So the pipeline from Morse Road to the development.
Yep.
And then a pipeline from the development to the ball fields.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, in part of our press presentations, we do have that slide that shows all the piping and infrastructure locations that I can make sure that, actually I believe it's posted on the town website. But if anyone needs it again, we'll probably have to, we should put it on the website as well, so they can see that.
Sure. Questions from the other boards? I had one quick question. My understanding is part of the Pine Hill leaching field is under the current ball fields. Is that correct?
Yes, right here, I believe.
Yeah, I did. Took 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
I have a question.
Yes.
The ball fields would be where the leaching fields are, but where would the actual wastewater treatment facility?
The actual
building.
So it could be on the fields as well. It could be, right there. It's a pretty small building. It's like, I believe it was 20 by 30. It also could be in a different location as well. We weren't planning on putting it within this development here because there just wasn't enough room, but so we would put it within the ball field area.
All right, questions from other board members?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. First is the $3.2 million estimate you got for the infrastructure. Does that include the water coming from Price Woodlands, from the end of Morse Road?
Yes, it does.
Okay. As a follow-on to that, it's an issue we had submitted as comments from the commission to the select board, was that, is that currently the conservation land, Price Woodlands, is that where, I don't know if you guys understand where it would be exactly?
I think it was more that's from the water,
That's for the water.
from the water commissioners, is that where you got
Yes,
the more? Okay.
exactly.
I think
Right there.
that's the group we'd want to ask.
And then, well, this isn't related, maybe if it's not related to the Conservation Commission, it's just a general question.
Yes.
Okay. So, I just wanted to understand, right, that you had said that you started out with an 80 unit and local septic and water supply there, but you had said that through conversations with town leaders, was that something, were those public discussions, or was that just sort of consultation work that you guys were doing?
Just consultation work and speaking with different people in town and looking more into the efforts the town has gone through in the past 15 years, I would say, to, you know, I believe Roger is here, Demler, you know, has a task force. There was, you know, money spent and time spent on how can Sherborn have a town center municipal water and sewer system. So as we kept digging into that and looked at the surveys, talked to people, felt people did want, you know, something like that in the town center.
So in those conversations, that's where you decided to go to a bigger thing from the feedback you were getting from the town and town leaders?
Exactly, yes. And to be able to go that route, we had to change the development plan into something that is more valuable to afford the costs, essentially. Okay. Yes.
Michael Lesser on the Conservation Commission versus my other questions, but just for, I guess it's a question also to other boards.
Stand up.
A question to the other boards, and is this okay?
There's a mic, isn't there?
No, they don't work.
Mics don't work.
I'll try to belt it out for the moment. It's a quick question. For the other boards, are we going to get any sort of technical support that's independent of the developer? Is that something that, in terms of just understanding sustainability of water supply, any advice we get about septic and wastewater treatment, is there a plan whereby boards will be supported with our own technical support on those issues, and how that's going to be funded? Whether that's ever been discussed in general, and whether any of the other boards have done that.
There's a statute that lets you request that from the developer.
But are there any other boards thinking of doing it, or do we want to coordinate on that or not?
I don't think anybody's filed an application.
We can't hear, I'm sorry.
So I'll respond. The normal process for a project of this size is to, just as was said, is for in the planning board process is to request funding for the use of consultants for things like traffic studies, certainly for the validity of the feasibility of water supply, and things like that. I didn't mention that another part of this process is the zoning of the water and sewer district, and that may require a consultant that we'd ask for the town to be able to hire a consultant. So those are things that goes through that whole zoning process, but those are things that are typical for a project like this. The intersection that was mentioned is something that has been talked about, and that needs study. So I think that's.
Well, is anybody planning to get our support or hire that, or should each board go ahead and just do its own thing?
I obviously think we ought to get together.
And so that's actually one of the points I do want to make is if you take the development of what's being built and proposed, and then you also take the infrastructure to make it happen. But not just the development, we're trying to propose the municipal water and sewer for the town. And the town is going to eventually be using the majority of that system. At first we would, but then the town would start putting the municipal buildings on it. If the school failed, the septic system, that would go onto the system. So please, separate the development from a second. Separate the development from the infrastructure. The infrastructure, we're trying to partner with the town. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we have the support of those boards that can guide us and answer questions that we may not know, because a lot of the boards have been studying this for 15 years and know a lot of information that we don't know. And we would ask that we have more support to be able to answer some of these questions that we have.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
From the select board, I'm going to talk to our group, but I think to address that, Michael, I think we should make a formal group of select board, conservation, board of health, and planning board, and the water commissioners, so we can study this all together as a town and make sure, we don't want everybody working in silos on this. The project would be more productive if all the boards work together. And I think from the select board, see if we could put a group together from all the different boards so we can study this together.
One of the rationales for this meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's why we wanted to have this meeting, so everybody could be in the same room at one time. And I think by forming that, we're not going to all order independent studies. We can work on it together and make sure, we're all on the same wavelength from all our boards.
Can I just add to that? That I think it would make sense for the select board to organize a group of experts, peer review experts, and have us do the vetting for that, for groups that cross jurisdictional grounds, so that we can have an expert that would be good both for the Conservation Commission and the Board of Health, try to save money that way, and run it through the board, and have us try and find those people who would then provide a resource to all the boards and committees and to the public in evaluating this.
Roger.
Roger Demler, Water Commissioner. The Water Commission and private citizens have been looking at this downtown water sewer problem for more than 15 years, but 15 years pretty actively. And we've had a consultant engineer working with us off and on during that period. And this proposition of having a well at end of Morse Road, and septic system, and the ball field is something that we have concluded is the most straightforward way to make any of this happen. Seems technically feasible to do it. We would certainly want to have strings attached to any agreement we have with them on the development to assure that the town has enough water to take care of the customers we hook up to it. We should have priority over what they get, but they've got to have some pretty early determination of capacities and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of engineering to do before you can sign off on a formal agreement, but I guess personally I agree that working with them is a terrific opportunity if the rest of the project makes sense to the town. It's a great way to save some money. It allows the project to be done on a commercial basis rather than a state-regulated construction process, which saves a lot of time and money, as we know from the library project. So there's a lot of background that goes along with this support. This is not an unreasonable thing to do. Thank you.
I'll go you first, because, and then
Abby, the one go first.
No, you were at your hand raised.
Okay. Andrew, my question was, I'm on Roger's committee, and is there any part of your 3.2 which is for distribution, or is it for the two systems?
It's for the two systems, but we have asked the town and talked to people in town that could we use the town's resources in laying some of the pipe, right? Because or digging a septic field. The town has machines and resources to potentially bring some of those costs down. And so, yes, that is for the two systems, and then we would be asking for help from the town's resources, the DPW and so on, to help us with some of the infrastructure.
But in terms of the town understanding what's being asked, there has to also, as a consultant, someone's going to have to come up with a real number for distributing water and sewer options within the map that will be created.
Yes.
And we need to know the cost of that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And it's not.
And it's not known. It's not known yet.
Good.
So the housing partnership has kind of been somewhat involved in paying attention to the different iterations over time. I know one thing that is, the first thing that came to mind was the clarification on the town use of the water, that it's a water district that's being proposed as Roger. Anyone who's been listening to Roger for years will know that this is not, when it says town-wide, it means town center, not everyone in Sherborn is going to be hooked up to this. This is just a district like Dover has for its water district. It's limited as to who can hook up. Obviously, the housing partnership partly has been in existence because of the 40B situation in our town, and we've been working, trying to figure out how we're going to add affordable numbers. And in the work that we've seen in studying assisted livings they're not going to help us in our numbers. Most likely, they will probably be counted as individual units. And so I guess it seems that the apartment scenario will not work. What has been discussed on some thought on how to counterbalance, and also there's the benefit looking at the Hunting Lane parcel that if someone else owning that land could have used that land and done a 40B. So there's pros and cons, and it's not all bad from a housing partnership if we're looking at, if we have two goals. One is to control how 40Bs are done in our town, and so and then the other is to try and add units so that we have some ability to control.
Yeah, and typically in other towns, what they have done historically with assisted living operators is they make a payment to a housing trust, affordable housing trust, to help if they don't contribute any affordable housing. And in this situation, that would be very similar. And the assisted living facility, whoever would come in as the assisted facility operator, would be at the mercy of the town to make an agreement on what that payment is. And so that wouldn't be us, because we wouldn't be the operators. But that's typically what's done in other locations if affordable housing isn't, if you're not building affordable housing in supplemental units.
So I'd just like to follow up on that and another thing. So for the assisted living operator, so that the project is contingent on that operator reaching that agreement to fund at least neutral, if not, or to fund affordable housing that's consistent with the housing production plan.
Absolutely. We do have relationships and have been in discussions with assisted living operators, national firms and local firms, and very successful ones across Massachusetts and the country. And they're very interested in this site. In this location and working with us. And at any point, I think we would bring them into the conversation. I think it's a little bit premature right now, but I think that would happen fairly soon to determine what that payment would be. It's just something that we don't know at this time.
Yeah, well, it would be enough to pay for affordable housing units that would be reconciled with the units that would count towards housing.
Exactly, and that's something that the affordable housing, your housing board would discuss with them, in conjunction with us, and we would facilitate it. But that would be, the project wouldn't go through unless you made a deal, right?
Okay. The other question that was sort of where we left off was TIF funding and whether it's feasible. So that's something that's...
Absolutely. Pam is going to talk towards that. So I don't know if it's a good time now to talk about the TIF. Pam, you're up.
I have to bring my crib notes on this one. Can everybody hear me okay?
Let's go over those. That doesn't help in here, but on TV.
Gotcha. All right. So tax increment financing is a tool, and I've had to do some research on it. I've been familiar with them, but we're on the end of being a voter at town meeting in other communities that have entertained TIF for one reason or another. In more urban or depressed areas, they're sometimes used as a way to entice economic development, to actually do redevelopment in areas that have, we're talking places like, not to pinpoint anybody, but Fall River, New Bedford, or some of the more urban areas that have seen better times, and they're trying to come and create a way to have an incentive both for the city or town to do some financing, but also through some state programs. The TIF would qualify those communities for some state programs for additional financing or grants. So I had been familiar with that. What I've been looking at over the past few weeks is how does it fit for Sherborn? I said there's got to be a way that we can use this as a tool to help do what it's supposed to do, which is finance. So I don't want to battle on with statutes and regulations. There are many, many pages of them, and they're somewhat confusing, and they do a lot of cross-referencing. So the crib notes I made for myself, I will try to walk through for you. But essentially, there are really kind of three sections of the general laws that allow for this. And there's one group called the Economic Development Coordinating Council, or Economic, I'm missing a letter there, but, and I'm sorry, the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council. But the general laws, chapter 40, section 59, and I think maybe I'll have Andrew post my notes, because they're really just kind of a walking through one section to the next, so if you're taking notes, feel free, but we can certainly make this available. But that section says that the town may adopt and execute a TIF financing arrangement by vote of town meeting pursuant to regulations issued by the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council. And that cross-references the general laws, chapter 23A, section 3B. And then town meeting may also authorize, and this is just a tidbit for your benefit, but it relates to the warrant articles that are proposed, is town meeting may authorize a single board to sign the agreement. So essentially, town meeting, all of you and all of your voters would have an opportunity to hear, discuss, have the questions answered, and vote on the ability to do the TIF. And then ideally, you would authorize your selectmen to, or your select board to work out the nitty-gritty details and hopefully sign the document, because this is it's a document with all of the agreements of the developer, the details of how much is being financed, over what period of time it's being financed, at the rate. For those of you who are here at the last meeting, I know Andrew described a little bit about the idea was to structure so that at a minimum the town would maintain the current tax rate. So we wouldn't go to zero, we'd still work at a level where you're maintaining the baseline, and the reduction would be over a period of years to help finance the cost of the infrastructure improvements, but that you wouldn't drop from whatever taxes are being paid today to a lower amount. We'd be working from there up. Ultimately, at about 10 years out, you'd be back to the full 100% valuation. Chapter 23A, Section 3B is the section that establishes the EACC, which is charged at the state level of overseeing and administering the Economic Development Incentive Program, which actually is not a piece of really what we need to do here, but it also authorizes the EACC, among other things, to, and this is a quote from the regulations, to certify and approve tax increment financing agreements and special tax assessments pursuant to, here we go again, Section 3E of this chapter and Section 59 of Chapter 40, which was the first one that authorizes this. Like I said, there's a lot of cross-referencing back and forth. I think if you read it enough times, you realize, okay, we're just going in circles and we're just making sure everything's consistent. The third important section in the general laws is that the town can offer a local, and this is really what comes to Sherborn. We're not talking about poverty-stricken areas. We're talking about something that's being proposed for the community that may create jobs, may create some tax revenue, something that's a permanent. In this case, I almost hate to say economic development, but at a small scale, it is. It's an economic investment in your community center. So the town may offer a local tax incentive to the owner of a certified project, and these are all ors, or a real estate project, if the town determines that the project is consistent with the town's economic development objectives. There are several others. There are 2 or 3 of them that could be a fit here, so I'm feeling comfortable that whichever way we look at it, this can be done at a local level. So it's similar to sometimes zoning, is you use it a local initiative to accomplish something rather than the top-down state level. 40B is one of those. You know, we get the state 40B, or sometimes towns will come in and say, we're going to do our own way to create affordable housing. We're going to be proactive. This is how I'm interpreting all of this. This is sort of a local way to come up with your own program to make this work. Yes, it does need to be run by the state. The EACC will ultimately approve the agreement that you come up with. But as long as it meets the provisions that are spelled out in quite detail in the regulations and in these sections of the statutes, I'm now feeling extremely comfortable that this is doable. We have talked to the Mass Office of Business Development, which is part of the EACC, and we've gotten, sort of verbal confirmation that, yeah, it looks like it works. The hesitation there is they never want to really opine on anything until they have an application before them. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but I think that's why I kind of did it one round a few weeks ago, and I've gone back and picked through it again and created my crib notes and kind of checked the boxes and crossed the T's. And I think with what's being proposed, that's not just for the project, it's for the community in terms of the infrastructure being proposed. The project being proposed is a qualifying project in that it's not just a single-family residential project. We're talking about the assisted living, which ultimately creates some jobs. We're talking about the market, which is a combination of things, both economic development, town revitalization, not revitalization, but sort of bolstering your downtown. I live in Bedford, and it was a much sleepier town 50 years ago when I was growing up than it is today. But it's something that Sherborn can be in control of, and I'm seeing this as I said, a tool, and I think a creative way to tackle not just creating water and sewer systems that will serve just the development, but that could benefit the downtown. That's my planner cap on the side. I do have a list on this that I think we can post on the website that talk about the detailed, many details of things that need to go into the application and the agreement itself. But I don't want to be long-winded here. But it's everything from describing the parcels to describing the project, decide how it's going to work and who's going to do what, and all of the financial arrangements as well. I'm happy to answer any follow-ups from that. Yeah.
So, has anyone looked at? Is this an alternative to the town going out and bonding $3.2 million and building a similar?
Michael, you can't talk from the back of the room.
Sorry.
Nobody can hear you. You gotta.
Yeah. Can you come up to the mic so folks listening
and introduce yourself?
It doesn't work, I was told.
This mic up here. Sorry, thanks, Michael.
Stand close to it. Be near it, don't talk into it.
So Michael Lee, 28 Wildwood Drive. What I wanted to ask was, is this a vehicle to finance this type of infrastructure for the town that avoids us putting bonded debt onto our town balance sheet, which, in addition to other things that we'll have to borrow for, have an implication over our financial rating at some point? Or would this still be viewed as $3.2 million of debt initially that the town is going to have on its balance sheet from a rating perspective? Has anyone looked into that or aware of it? The treasurer comment?
I'll give you my thoughts if you don't have somebody, but if you do, I don't have the time to answer the question.
So the treasurer hasn't been engaged in this at all?
Nobody's looked into that, but that's a good question that we should.
My quick thoughts on that, and I'm not the treasurer, are that no, it's not debt because we're financing in the form of not collecting, right? So in a sense, the property is assessed at, I'm using random numbers, but $1 million, but we're paying taxes on 500, right? Or triple it, whatever. So it's income that could have come in and then you've been used to pay for bond financing, but rather you're not collecting it. It's also our belief that doing it this way, we can actually do the project less expensively. And then, because it's not money that you do need to borrow in bond, even if the numbers are the same in terms of financing, it's not bond money that's out.
So which board would own clarifying things like that?
I'm going to ask the treasurer to clarify that.
I'd like to loop back to an affordable housing question and a comment for you, Andrew, and for the Affordable Housing Committee. The first question is, the 160 units that we're adding, will any of them count for the affordable housing under the 10% subsidized housing index? The comment is, if none, I'm assuming that the payment in lieu of affordable units would be substantial, because we're talking about 160 units being added to the denominator. And, basically we have to add 16 more units to stay even with the 10% SHI safe harbor. So it's really a question for affordable housing and for you, Andrew.
Yes, that is true. The payment would need to be substantial because they're adding that many, and number one, it's beds too, so I don't know how they work in terms of how many beds are actually units and how that gets calculated. But there would be an in lieu payment, a substantial one, that would have to be made by the assisted living operator, which, as I mentioned, is historically done many times. Because that's part of the problem, is they build these assisted living facilities and they do add to the inventory, and just like you have addressed, other towns have addressed it through in lieu payment.
Any other questions from the board before we open up to the general floor?
I just want to follow up. Who's going to figure that out? Because that's a question. Your comment that there's going to be some number of beds. I mean, that's a question that's been on the table for 6 months now. So who's going to figure that out and bring the information in? Because I think a lot of people in this room really care about that issue above many of the other issues. I mean, the design's great, the concept's great, it's great to know all these things, but if there's a threshold issue, like it's going to blow our affordable housing plan out of the water, we ought to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Is that something you'll commit to come back to us with an answer on?
Absolutely. With the TIF. There's so many details and complexities to this project. We're trying to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. So we are ready at any point to bring in the assisted living operator, whether it's, we do have a few that would be able to start talking through this. But we didn't want to do it at a meeting like this or other meetings because it just gets very confusing. But that is,
I think it's a baseline piece of information, not necessarily the operator, just the answer to that question.
Absolutely.
Just a quick follow-up. I know early we weren't even crystal clear on whether assisted living counted as a unit or not for your denominator. So I think we've gotten there that there's some guidance that we do. Although I'm not sure the memory care units, we'll get an answer.
So you're kind of figuring out my question, which is we need to know.
Yeah, got it.
Eric?
Yep, so I had a question back to the TIF. On a previous presentation, you said the TIF was only on the assisted living and not the other components. Is that still the case, or is the TIF on the whole site, or some portion of it?
It would be on the assisted living and memory care. That would be under one commercial operator.
Okay, but then the market in the restaurant would be full tax rate from day one?
Yes, that's what we have.
The houses.
Terrific. Any other questions from the boards before we open this up?
I just wanted to clarify from the housing partnership stance, we've been looking at this issue of from the housing partnership standpoint, we've since March, February 2018, this concept first started rolling around, and we were concerned about how would SHI numbers be counted and how would this undermine any work that we've been trying to work towards, and reached out immediately to the state representatives to try and figure out, well, how would these be counted? And it's been extremely difficult to get concrete answers, partly because the state organization is counting numbers, counting these units a certain way, and they don't know necessarily how the federal census is going to count them, and the federal census is not, if there's a question about if it's a group home, or basically it's 90% certain that there will be counted as units. The discussion was potentially the memory care, because they don't have kitchens and they might be considered a group home and those get counted different. So it's not something we've ignored, and we will continue to be looking at. And obviously, with the discussion of whoever is looking at maybe being the memory care operator, that's going to be a big issue to deal with.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the floor before we open it up? There was a question about the TIF, a follow-up back here. If you could come here, we all need to come up to the mic, identify yourself, because the folks at home, we need to talk to you over Sherborn Cable about fixing the sound system here, but they can hear it here. So,
Chris Decker, Great Rock. On the TIF, a couple questions. My basic understanding of the TIF is for future tax revenues. Why are you deferring the assisted living tax revenues in this transaction? That's what it sounds like. That we're waiting for those taxes. We're going to allow.
Could everyone hear that?
If this assisted living facility gets done, like say 2 years, are you immediately beginning to pay taxes on the assisted living facilities revenues, or are we going to wait for the end of the life of the TIF?
I think
repeat the question.
I think the question is, if we're doing assisted living as something to create tax, partially to create tax revenue, why are we deferring that revenue right into the future?
Yeah.
So
because normally a TIF is for incremental funding for the benefits of this sewer and water plant.
Correct.
And that would be the other commercial businesses, not the assisted living that gets put in place right away. So that's part of my question, and then I got a related question to that.
Okay, so Andrew can jump in as well, but the way I envision this is we have a project, and probably the whole project would qualify. The one that comes more immediately with tax ratables at a level that can generate something that we can actually discount the tax, from 0 or 10 or 20%, on up to, it's allowed to go right up to 100% or sometimes even more. That you incrementally increase the amount of tax that would be paid. I guess it could be structured differently. I don't know if we've really considered that. I think the greater value, however, is on the assisted living than on the market and the restaurant, the remaining pieces. So part of this is just about economics, and if we were to do it on the other piece, we'd really be out there 30 years or so rather than coming in and getting it paid for.
And we plan to do it in a 10-year period.
Right.
And the assisted living, through some studies we've done in other towns and newly built facilities, it's anywhere from, a facility like this could be anywhere from $16 to $30 million in assessment value. And the idea is that we would take a portion of that revenue, a majority of it, and pay off the construction loan essentially. That will build the municipal water and sewer.
So the next question is, who's on the hook for a default? Let's say the project gets going and it collapses.
Repeat the question.
Who's on the hook in the event of a default?
If there's a default, the projects get hung up. And I'll give you a different example. I saw one of these master plans get done in Reading, Connecticut. It became a disaster. And it got stuck in the mud. It's probably for 10 years. So I'm not saying this one could, but that means Sherborn's on the hook for
Right.
$3.5–4 million, it sounds like, if there's a default, right?
In this case, the financing is a private loan that the town's not obligated on. So
At all.
while the towns were, again, actually probably better than bonding in that case, because the town is incrementally reimbursing, hopefully at a level that'll help pay construction loan, but ultimately it's being privately funded and then reimbursed over a period of time by a reduction in taxes. So I don't see a way that the town is going to be on the hook.
So we won't assume the debt
Correct.
until the project is completed.
Because we're
Correct.
developers
Okay.
building.
Chris, your time. You can come back a second time. Gino, I think you were next. And then
Just for some context, the treasurer did happen to, I did happen to speak with her today, and she gave an example of what the debt service would be without knowing the 3.2 million figure. She gave me an example of 3.1 million, and the debt service would be about $200,000 a year for over 20 years. That's from a recent bond sale that the town has incurred.
Richard?
Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street.
Hey, Richard, can you turn around and address?
Hi, Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street. For the TIF, is an amount specified, and therefore that's what the town is on the hook for? Or is it that if the project goes over, the town is on the hook for how much the project goes over?
Did everyone hear that? The question was, is there a set amount in the TIF or otherwise of the, I guess, project cost as well as the amount being financed? And is the town on the hook for an overage? Again, I think the infrastructure would be privately constructed with private construction loans. So that's the guy over here, Gary, that's going to get stuck with that. So the really private financing. So I think maybe the best way to think of the TIF is almost a town financing to reimburse the developer. So in the first instance, any default, if the project goes belly up partway through construction, there's still a construction loan out there that's due to the lender. The other piece of it, however, I think in terms of the structure of the TIF and really how long and how much is being reduced each period is part of the details of this fairly long TIF agreement, which is an agreement between the town and the developer. And it lays out literally year by year how that financing works. Because it is a financing plan, so you're coming up with an agreement that needs to be negotiated and worked out once we have real numbers, once we know what the real estimated taxes would be, so that we're clear on a literally mapping out year by year what that's going to look like. And all of that will be in writing in the TIF agreement before it's signed.
Just to make sure I understand. So if the project goes over by $1 million, the investors lose $1 million, the town, because you have laid out this plan, is not going to be foregoing another $1 million of revenue.
I think the answer to that question is correct. Hopefully, all of those numbers have been worked out before the TIF agreement is signed, approved by the state, and put in motion.
Yeah, we have to do engineering and get the costs and site analysis, and so we're saying it's 3.2 million. Will it be less than that? Will it be more? Of course it can.
Whatever the number is at the beginning.
Go ahead. You want to identify yourself?
Yep. John Garrison, 33 Hunting Lane. Andrew,
John, turn around and face the group. Thank you.
Andrew, you said a minute ago that an earlier iteration of this project was 80-bed memory care with using septic and
25,000 square feet
well water.
retail.
And the others. Yep. There's a book that's been published by an economist at the University of Chicago about uses and abuses of the TIF financing. And to simplify it, one of the basic principles is what's called the but-for principle, which is towns should not be using this TIF financing to finance development that would otherwise happen. You want to finance the incremental revenues. So if we could build 80 units without financing, we should be looking at the differential between that and the 160 units. We shouldn't be looking at what the property is generating now, and suddenly it's generating $300,000 a year in taxes. I'm also a little skeptical of the $16 million figure, as the total assessed value of all the commercial property in town, from the Citgo to the Heritage, is less than $16 million. So I think all of these numbers have to really be nailed down.
We did a spreadsheet of all properties in town very similar to Sherborn, and we can actually post that on the website.
Would that assessment be based on income generated? Because my understanding is that currently our assessed process does not look at income. It's just based on market value.
It's based on, I believe it's based on market value.
I have other questions, but I'll let other people.
Thanks, John.
Lanny Rubin, 26 Elliott Street. I'm curious, since the TIF is, the Selectman Giano at the January 17th meeting said without the TIF this project is a no-go. What shouldn't the town have a chance to vote on the TIF before everybody goes through this incredible amount of labor and finalizes the details of the project? I mean, the TIF comes first, doesn't it? That was my understanding based on Selectman Giamo's comment.
The TIF has to be voted on in town meeting.
Is it a majority or 2/3, do you know?
I believe it's a majority.
I think it's a majority.
Because it's
but I
been
would
changing.
double check.
Majority.
But it does require town meeting approval.
Absolutely.
So that is what we're asking for, is to get on.
But shouldn't that happen first before people go through this incredible amount of labor to work out all the design features and the rest? If you want to go through all that work and then find out the town
That's
doesn't
been one of
approve
our
the TIF.
challenges all along, because with respect to the people in the room and the rest of the community, I mean, you want to know what we're doing this for, and it's been a little bit of a chicken and the egg.
Just to respond to you, Lenny, a lot of the feedback we've received is, why are we even looking at a TIF if we don't know if we want the development? So this is the response to that, is that people want to see, before we even consider a TIF, is it something the town wants? So that's why we're going through this.
Actually, if you have questions, why don't you line up so that you can...
Frank Cook, 6 Town Line Road. My question for you is, if one of the benefits of this is to improve Sherborn and Sherborn's town center, you are bringing in a restaurant, you are bringing in some market space, but a lot of it is assisted in memory care facility. I don't know that the residents of Sherborn need that so much. Has there been any thought to anything else that could benefit Sherborn Center, to bring people in, to bring maybe even more development in, maybe more people in, a different type of a look at that downtown? That would be one question. And the second question, and I'll take the answers when I sit down, is when you build a sewer system, it'll obviously cover the area that you need it for, but how much of the rest of the town will the water and sewer system cover?
Yes, so we did look at many alternatives to bringing in other uses to the site, and the mechanism that, where the assessed value of the assisted living facility really brought the dollars needed to be able to support the municipal water and sewer system. And so we understand that the market is something that the community wants, another restaurant, and we kept those two elements. We did, as one of our alternatives, look at affordable housing. That economically didn't work. I mean, there's no train station, there's no transit, so the apartments wouldn't work financially for the developer. And more retail, essentially, we had initially, wouldn't work either. We talked to a lot of retailers out there, and even though this is 30,000 cars a day, it's more of a town, local retail place than a regional, or even a couple towns over. So retail wouldn't work either. So the assisted living is where we ended up, because we're trying to do the water, municipal water and sewer.
We have the folks that have not asked questions at the front of you. Sorry, be very British here.
The second question.
The second question was, how much of the town will the water, sewer system and water provide?
Initially we're building the system, and I'd probably say that we would be using 50 to 60% of the system when it's first built, because we're the largest user. And then the town would be using the other 50%. But over time, because of the increasing the capacity of the system, the town has the ability to utilize up to probably 75% of the system through adding the school, all the municipal buildings. Could be Abbey Road, could be the other Woodhaven, many other places in town could be added onto that system, where we would end up being 30% and the town would be 70%. So that's kind of some rough estimates on what we're envisioning.
Neil Kessler, I'm taking off my Conservation Commission hat, putting on my private citizen hat. My question is sort of related to that. My first one is, so for this facility you're proposing, what is the gallons per day wastewater output of that project?
That's something that I wish my engineer was here to answer, but I believe it's 10,000. Gary, you know, yeah, we'll have to get that.
Can you ballpark it? You just said 10.
It's 110,000 per day.
Could you speak up, please?
He's trying to figure it out. Yeah, 110,000 per bedroom.
Right, so the general calculation for wastewater is 110, for a single family bedroom is 110 gallons per day. So, I don't, and usually the calculation with something like this is a little bit lower, depends. But, so, because I'm trying to do the math, because I know that the capacity of the system you've quoted somewhere, I don't know if it was tonight, is 120,000 gallons. So it sounds like there's going to be a lot of extra capacity, which can be seen as a positive, but I'd also like to point out that it could be seen as a negative. If, you know, because we could hook all the existing systems or municipal buildings and all that, but it could also be something where there would be a tremendous push after the infrastructure is in to build up the downtown, and therefore you sort of run the risk of trying to balance between robust downtown and overcrowded downtown, because the incentive is there from a tax perspective to build.
We're starting we're going incrementally on the system, so we'd actually build 40,000 gallons.
But it's been sort of that the ball fields would ultimately hold or sustain 120,000 gallons.
Yes, but we wouldn't build that initially.
That I understand. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was just to point out, because this has been talked about affordable housing already, is that if 16 units, if it's adding 16, we would actually probably end up with, if you have a traditional developer doing a 40B, 75% market rate, 25% affordable, we would need a project just to cover these new units of about 64 units. 16 affordable, the rest not. So that's a project the size of the Coolidge project up at 104. So that is a fairly large project we'd have to add into the mix even before the 2020 census. It is a big factor we need to sort of, it's not just the money, it's an issue of where you're going to put it and all those kinds of things. And I just think these are concerns that we as a town ought to think about and really weigh before we make a commitment like this to a project that has this implication. So thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Hi, I'm Debbie DeMar. I live on Hollis Street.
Hey Debbie, can you turn the face of the thing?
Hello.
Thank you.
This is totally different, although I'm very concerned about water, especially for the future. I'm just wondering if any consideration has been given to making all these rooftops or these buildings energy sustainable. I mean, I see a lot of potential for solar panels, or down to the insides of the house or the buildings. Has any consideration, and maybe a housing partnership would have something to say about that? I don't know.
We would, and I believe the partners that we're talking to for the assisted living, I believe we would, and I believe the partners that we're talking to for the assisted living facility would as well. As a developer, when I develop my own projects, every project I develop is a LEED certified project and incorporates many of those elements. Solar panels, water retention, all of that. So we definitely would be looking into that on these type of projects. We're thinking of a very high quality project here. This is not something that...
Hopefully with not too much irrigation and totally green lawns. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and one project that we're working on currently, just to give you an example, is all the irrigation has gone off of rain gardens from rainwater coming off the roof. So something like that could be implemented in these buildings.
Alex Weatherall, 21 South Main Street. TIF or not to TIF? That is the question. I just wanted to call out Roger Demler and acknowledge and thank you for being the first representative of a town public commission, in this case the Water Commission, to render what sounded to me, who's a layperson, a fact-based judgment that sounded surprisingly favorable toward this project. And irrespective of whether it's favorable or unfavorable, it's the first time in my 4 visits that I've heard anyone representing a town board Water Commission, Conservation, Planning, or Select Board, who all been remarkably quiet as to what their particular fact-based judgment is in this project. And my feeling is it's long past time for all those boards to stand up and be heard. And one thing I would say, and this is a question not so much to developers as to the boards, is there seems to be a prevailing sense that either we develop this or not. But my sense is the core at 41 is zoned commercial. He can do something with it. The piece behind Hunting Lane is zoned, 2-acre residential. He can do that with it. I'd like to know, planning board, let's say, what can they do today in such a way that none of us in the audience, whether we want it or not, have anything to say about it? Because I think we should dispense with the fiction, it seems to me, that suggests that we have the potential that nothing will happen in that space. My sense is something's going to happen. And what does the current zoning allow to happen? And I would like the board, probably the planning board, to articulate that to us. And if I'm the only one who's missed this, I stand corrected, but I don't think I am. My sense is there's some uncertainty as to what can he do now, if none of us had any say in it.
You missed it.
Your chance to repeat it.
So what can be done is, by right, on the 41 North Main side, the 7-acre side, you could add maybe two or three houses there. It's zoned for that, and that's what it could take. On that same parcel, though, part of it's in business general, and they could put in a building, as long as it's in the business general area, of a very large size right up next to the railroad tracks. There's room to put in a large building. The only limitation is there's a small setback. There's no setback really on the railroad track side. There's a small setback on the road frontage. So it could be a very large commercial building there. The limitation's height, and it's 35 feet or 2.5 stories. So that's what could go there. On the parcels up on Hunting Lane, that's zoned, part of it's zoned 2-acre, 1-acre, and you can put in about what he's shown, which is about 8 houses, roughly.
My name is Charlie Safinero. I live on Hunting Lane, and I guess I just had a couple questions, fairly simple, which is, so who's the developer?
Gary is the owner of the land. I'm the development consultant.
Okay, and you, did you develop, or we the consultant on Abbey Road as well?
Yes.
And I believe
Actually, I'm the developer and owner of Abbey Road.
So I think in one of the meetings,
in partnership with another.
you had said that financially that wasn't a real success. Is that fair? You said that.
If we were to go out and get investors, like a large commercial project like this, it wouldn't attract the money that it needed to get built. However, we did it, I would say it was a little bit more on Bob Murchison's part. It was more of a mission-driven idea for him. And there's other reasons for me to get involved in that project. But
so since this is, all financially driven, as you said before, have you ever done a project of this size or scale, either of you?
Yes. I'm building a project right now, a 15 million 60-unit apartment building in Lincoln. It's in partnership with the town of Lincoln. It's providing 25% affordable units. And the town is actually granting us $1 million out of their housing trust from a benefactor. And it was voted on a town meeting, probably about 90% approval. That is in construction right now. We're also doing a project in Reading. We received $1.4 million from DHCD for affordable housing. On that project, that is in a 40R district. Also building a 40-unit building, condo building in Cambridge on a brownfield site that had a lot of environmental concerns, and we've improved that project. And that project is going to be done in the spring. As a developer as well, the Abbey Road project comes to mind. That was an $8 million project, 18 units, and it seemed like it was a very successful project from the town standpoint. There's a lot of people here tonight that actually live there, and so you know, as a developer, I'm taking a little bit of a different, at least personally, different role in this project. I'm not really developing the project. I'm a development consultant to Gary.
So you wouldn't be the developer then?
I potentially could, but right now I'm just a development consultant.
How would you decide whether you wanted to be a developer in this project?
If it was financially viable.
Can you wait your turn in line, please?
Sure, I just didn't want to miss this opportunity to ask.
Thank you.
If it was financially viable, I would look at it. But I don't own the land.
Can I ask my question, or shall I get?
Yeah, if you get in line, yes, you can, certainly. Sir.
Joel Foner, Whitney Street. Actually, back to the ball field and the leaching fields. Having been through this with Conservation Commission, I did do a Title V to buy this place. Has anybody done the engineering work to look at the water table level to find out whether you actually can put them down below ground level?
We did.
And if that isn't possible, then what?
We did do a perk test on the land, on the soil, and it did come back very favorable.
But did you test the water level?
That's on the perk test, that's the perk test.
Could you speak up, please?
That is the perk test, was the finding out where the water table is. So we can issue those.
Okay. And based on the regulations in town, you know that this isn't going to result in a mound up on where we're going to have ball fields?
No, exactly. That's what our engineer, that's experienced doing this.
Thank you.
Does anyone else ask the question yet, or?
I'll have it. No, but I'm not asking.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'll be quick.
Great, thanks.
Shifting gears a little bit on the water and sewer district. Has the town water and sewer district, and I'm really kind of addressing this to Roger, has the district been delineated?
It has not.
Would it include Hunting Lane?
The Town Center Water Option Committee was to look at feasibility and financing. And one of the questions that we are not prepared to answer is, where does the district go? That's up to the planning board, selectmen, board of health. But
The reason behind that question is I'm thinking about this $3.2 million. And the numbers we presented 2 years ago at town meeting were $4 million for water,
right.
$2 million for septic, if it was just north of the railroad tracks, another 2 if we extended it down to include municipal.
That's correct.
So that's 6 to 8. Now we're talking about 3.2. That's a big change. And if we were going to add Hunting Lane, another 30 acres, that's a huge expansion.
Correct.
Water and sewer district. I don't, those numbers don't make sense to me.
I haven't seen their numbers. And I don't know what's included in there.
Part of the reason is the scale, I believe, of what you were quoted was a large system, like 110,000 gallons. That, no, it was a 40,000 gallon system.
Yeah.
But maybe also could be, I mean, obviously union rates and.
It's a big differential.
No, it is.
Half.
But I mean, we only can do so much in terms of going out and getting estimates and engineering for our work. So we have to find out what the discrepancy is.
Okay, Darrell Beardsley, 54 Forest Street. So there was a question or a comment earlier about technical feasibility of this, and I think for wastewater treatment in particular, we can find technologies probably that will address most of the things that we need to think about. But I do want to highlight that this is not a trivial undertaking for the town on a few fronts. It's a big responsibility to own and operate water supply and or wastewater treatment. So for either one, we want to make sure that it's done right. So concerns that the Board of Health has, among others, is that we know what we're getting into and we're planning ahead for what to do about the things that are going to be coming in too. And I'll focus on the wastewater treatment because that's a little more tricky than the water supply. So for most of my career, I've worked with clients on their wastewater issues, usually industrial, but some corporate campus clients that operate systems that look a lot like a small municipality, but those are very controlled circumstances where they can dictate what specifically is going on within that environment, and they're still difficult to operate, and I do think the costs that we've been quoting are low, based on what I've seen. People are always wrestling with changes in understanding about what contaminants may be there, changes in technology, aging of the system, upset conditions. Someone does something, certainly for any kind of care facility that might be using disinfectant, that can completely disrupt a wastewater treatment system. Also, wastewater treatment systems are geared towards taking care of biological materials, so bacteria, viruses, solids, nitrogen compounds, that kind of thing. But once it starts getting into the realm of pharmaceuticals, which again the environmental community is really struggling with because they are so varied and they're ever changing. So some technologies deal with the World Health Organization, and lots of others have been evaluating this over the last number of years, trying to figure out what to do. Some get taken care of beautifully by a standard treatment system, and others pass through. I believe Prozac was one that passes through 90% untreated. So when we're looking at densities, it's not like Deer Island, which is taking a lot of wastewater and discharging it into the ocean, which people aren't drinking directly. We should think of whatever we're discharging as something that we're going to be drinking. So those are some of the concerns that I think we just want to really know what we're getting into. We want to understand the technologies. We want to understand how we build a system that can flexibly deal with what may change in the future, because it's going to be our obligation as a town to provide continual service to residences. Once you have residences, it's not as easy as an industry or a corporate campus, because you can just shut down and send everybody home. But this is people's homes, and so the rules are just, it's much more challenging. It can be done, but we need to really look at it in detail, devil's in the details. So.
Thanks, Darrell. Stephen?
Hi, Stephen Tsai, 41 Green Lane. I am a member of the advisory committee, but I'm here, this is just as a private citizen comments. But for me, actually, I'm one of the people for whom the affordable housing question as to what is actually going into the assisted living facility is primary. And the way that I see it, before advisory, I was on the housing partnership, so affordable housing is very much, you know, what I think is the major issue facing the town. And we have a lot of housing that's coming online. The Fields is coming online, Whitney Farms is starting to build, 59 North Main is coming online, and then in the supposedly near future, 2 very large properties on Coolidge are coming online in the neighborhood of 160 units. And now you are proposing here about another 170 units when you add the 10 units on Hunting Lane. That's a lot of new housing that's coming in. And I don't think that we really have a good sense of what that's going to do to the town, to the budgets of CM&D, fire, police, what's going to do to the schools. And what you are proposing is to not add any affordable housing, and instead to donate money into the housing trust to then build even more housing in the future. And I actually want to correct what Neil had said, because he said that for 16 affordable units, we would need to build a 64-unit 40B project. But actually, his calculation was wrong. It would have to be a 107-unit 40B project in order to make up for that, essentially this project here. So that's, to me, that's not really a direction that I want to see the town go. There is an option of affordable assisted living that does exist. There is a group in Massachusetts called the Grantham Group. They have 8 to 10 or so, actually 25% affordable assisted living facilities. They're actually in the process of developing one with the town of Concord named Junction Village. So it is a thing that is done with a 25% affordable assisted living facility that works like a rental unit, which is to say all of the beds in that assisted living facility would count towards our sustainable subsidized housing inventory. So that's a huge shift in our SHI from we need to add another 107 units in order to make up for this, versus, oh, actually, this project is going to contribute 110 units to our SHI. That would certainly put us in safe harbor, and if you add on the Coolidge properties coming online, that would actually put the town in safe harbor until the 2030 census, that would be a huge boon for the town. So to me, it's crucial knowing what that is, and I would very, very strongly encourage you to secure an affordable assisted living facility operator in that space prior to coming to the town to ask for the TIF.
Hi, my name is Craig Mills. My wife and I moved into Hunting Lane just last spring. And one of the key reasons that we did was because we just love the bucolic nature of this town. You should all be commended for such a beautiful town. And honestly, I can't even imagine that the signature architectural element of Sherborn would be an assisted living facility. Although many of us are getting up there in age. I just turned 65 a few months ago, so I can speak that way. But honestly, we're really quite dismayed that that would be the signature element as you come into town. And I know that it's hidden a little bit, but I don't think that that really matters. I also think that it's way out of scale with the downtown area as well. It dwarfs everything else in town. And I don't think that that is what the townspeople here, certainly that we would support and like. In addition, one of the key elements that I think all of us experience is the traffic in this town. I'm very surprised that the developer hasn't suggested that they would pay for a traffic study, and that hasn't already been done. I mean, it's really a significant issue here in this town, certainly for about a 3-hour period in the morning, a 3-hour period in the afternoon. And I can't imagine all of this additional development and what it would do to the traffic, though I'm no traffic expert. So I think that that's a really key issue. I think the TIF issues are very important. Everyone has said that. I think it's time for the boards in town to prioritize the issues here and get their own experts involved. If they want to see this project possibly continue in some form, there's no substitute for getting your own independent analysis. And the developer should pay for it. That's what happens. The town should not be paying for it, but for this development, which is going to primarily benefit the developer, we wouldn't be here tonight, and all of the costs would not be incurred. So I think that all of the boards should look to the developer to be paying for the independent support that the boards need. But I also think it's really key that all of the boards get together and prioritize the issues here. And the TIF is clearly an important issue, and I think it's time that town council get involved. There are legions of legal issues that need to be sorted out here, as well as business and community issues. They need to be dealt with. And for those reasons, I don't think that the town is certainly ready to have any vote anytime soon. I mean, all we've heard are issue after issue after issue tonight, none of which have been run to ground. So it's time that they are, and then, and only then, should a vote occur.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To answer one of the points that was made, we have asked for opinion of town council on the TIF. It's obviously a critical issue. We've got a draft. We're waiting for the final opinion. Lanny?
Yes, Lanny, Route 26 Elliott Street. Just curious, in the water system, does that include the cost, include hooking in all the existing businesses? Or is that going to be an added cost to them if they want to hook into it? So it's not assuming, this plan is not assuming the existing businesses are going to tie in, most of whom have already taken action to make their water or septic acceptable, if not optimal.
And they don't have to tie into the system if they don't want to, but if their septic fails, we believe that it's actually going to be more affordable to tie into the system as opposed to upgrading the septic.
No, but in terms of development, let's be realistic. You got a railroad track and a swamp on the west side, you have ball fields on the east side, and you have very little developable land. Yeah, there probably is a little bit, but to talk about infrastructure for development is a little bit of a fantasy, and it's not real to the lay of the land.
Thanks, Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street. I want to reiterate a couple of points made, especially about, I don't think this town is ready. I don't think it could possibly be responsibly ready to vote on anything in June. When I was on school committee, we asked this town and Dover each for about $500,000 to pay for air conditioning. 4 months before town meeting, I was already schlepping around to town boards with a fully developed financial proposal, what it would cost, who was going to pay for it, how it was going to get installed, how we were going to get the whole thing done over the summer so that we wouldn't interrupt school. That was about where this project should be if it's going to town meeting, and it's nowhere near that. We need a study of wastewater treatment environmental effects. We need to study the wastewater treatment economics, what it's going to cost this town to run it, whether it could possibly make money. We have no idea whether we're going to be owning a project that will continue to cost this town money or not. We need a study of traffic. We need more studies about what this is going to do to the school population. If it's true that this is going to increase the number of units, number of total housing units we're going to need in the town, what does that do to the school population? Those are just some of the questions that need to be answered, and we are just not in any position at the moment to vote on approving this project or even approving individual parts of zoning that go with it.
Susie Wheelwright, 137 Hunting Lane. I have a question about the TIF. I don't understand it fully, but I think I heard you say something to the effect of the town could use it for something like an affordable housing project. Am I correct in what I heard you say?
Actually, housing is one thing TIF typically is not used for because it's not economic development. It's not. We don't typically look at housing as for tax generation, but it's really TIF is more about jobs and economic development rather than housing. So, if I suggested housing is something that would be included, that's not correct.
I was going to suggest that what the town really needs is affordable housing, and that the TIF might be a wonderful way for the town to keep control, to find a developer, to enter into a TIF and provide some affordable housing, which is what the town really needs, not assisted living and memory care. Affordable housing would make us vibrant. Affordable housing would be something where we would be performing a responsibility that we have had for a long time and that some of us have been conscious of for a long time, but there has not been the will to figure out a way to finance. Now, I think there probably is a way if there's a will. This may not be it, but I think that's the...
Thanks, Susie.
Carol Mills, 39 Hunting Lane. It's my knowledge that water waste treatment plants create odor, and we're going to have that in our downtown, which I don't think is appropriate. That's all.
Frank Hess, 64 South Main Street. I'm concerned about the TIF because one explanation I heard of the TIF was basically, let's say it's $4 million for the sewer and the water, and the group pushed that money up. That over the 10 years, they would get that whole $4 million back, the whole thing. And the thing is that everyone else in the whole system has already spent money on a well, they've already spent it on a septic system, so they basically would be getting a water system and a sewer system for nothing. Now, I work with Roger, and I think that we are going to need, if you look at the concentric circles of all the wells and the septic systems, they overlap where they shouldn't overlap, and those things could not be built today. So eventually something is going to have to happen. But I think that as we determine how much money we're going to get back, I think there should be some sort of adjustment, and it should not necessarily be free, because the town would be providing the well field, the town would be providing the site for the water tank, the town would be providing the site for the distribution of the effluent, and also the site for the building of the sewage plant. So we have quite an investment already. So I think we have to look at the way that goes. I don't think it should be 100% reimbursement for the cost.
Thanks, Frank.
Just a quick response there is the details of that piece, as I said before, the financing, the TIP agreement is where all that's going to come out. So when we have better numbers from the town's investment, contributions from Gary's, contributions on the front end, what we call soft costs, and just doing all the studies that are necessary to date, as well as the actual construction. But all of that will be on the table when this TIP agreement is negotiated. So your points are well noted, but I think they will be accommodated when we get that far down the road.
First, Linda Durensis, South Main Street, Sherborn. I want to congratulate the Yawns on also celebrating Valentine's Day at this meeting, as is the Durensis.
I can tell you, a number of men in town called me and thanked us for scheduling
Well,
I'm just saying.
well, they probably, the divorce lawyers would like to know their names, Chuck. And on that point, I would like to I keep hearing that this isn't ready, we don't have that number. Mike made a great point. We've been asking for months for this number. You still haven't given it to us. Your consultants, you have to pay for the town's consultants, that's nice. But I would assume you're not going to agree with our consultants, like say, i.e. traffic. We've heard about the wells, you're talking about all this, but all the people that are in the surrounding areas, so you're gonna need wells. You're gonna need a lot of consultants. The town's gonna need consultants, you're gonna need consultants, they're gonna have time to do their reports, they're gonna have time to come back and report to us. The numbers that Mike has been asking for months, you still don't have. Not that I don't enjoy spending Valentine's Day with you, but you're now saying that you're going to have a meeting in June. After the schools get out in June, a lot of people leave. I would like from you a commitment that there's no town meeting past the day that the schools get out, because I do not want to hear, good news, July 4th, we're going to have a meeting. So do I have from the developers, there's not going to be, because you're not ready for prime time. That's what's...
It won't be on July 4th.
Oh, it won't be in July or August. You're not ready for prime time. You need to get answers. You're wasting our time. We have other things to do. We all care passionately about this town. That's why we all bought into it, and we live here. And you're just wasting our time. The next meeting, I expect answers to all these questions you've gotten. People have said on the website, they have asked you questions. Their frequently asked questions aren't on your frequently asked questions. Get your act together.
But that is why we just launched the website to get this.
Right, and they said, if you read next door Sherborn, they said my frequently asked questions. Some people have come to every single meeting and said my frequently asked questions aren't there. So they're your frequently asked questions, but please pay attention to these people's frequently asked questions and get your act together and get the consultants. You should have had these consultants done by now before having this meeting. There was absolutely no reason. You know that you're doing wells. You know that neighbors are going to be affected. You know that traffic, you made very light of the four-way intersection. If there was an accident there today at the four-way intersection, right at Pine Hill Lane, you don't have a traffic study. That should be being discussed. Why don't you have that?
Because we need to do that. We need to come up with a development plan that everyone likes. Then we do the study. Then the town hires a peer review that we pay for. That's usually process.
So you're not ready for June 2019 town meeting.
I'd just like to interject, there's no application filed yet, and this again is, we're trying to do so much at a conceptual level, and it's a struggle for you, and clearly, and it's a struggle
Right,
for
but
our
can we
team.
agree that June 2019 is not realistic?
Thanks, Linda.
Okay.
see 3 people online that haven't spoken for, yeah, can those 3 folks?
So-
Michael, you haven't spoken yet?
John, 44 North Main Street. You know, I've just seen that this thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it's become more rooms and more rooms, and we're all gonna go vote on a TIF. And honestly, if we vote on the TIF and it goes through, it could keep getting bigger. So I haven't seen any compromises. It just gets bigger and bigger. And I thought somewhere in this you'd say 200, then it would land at 100, and everyone might be happy. But if we deny the TIF, then you can build what fits. And my guess is there isn't much water there. So it would really limit what we all end up looking at. So for people who really don't want to look at such a large development, if there's no TIF, then maybe we can get something that fits the town. Thanks.
Thank you.
Michael Lesser, 54 Forest Street. I agree with a lot of the earlier comments. I guess I'll just step back to one particular point of project definition, which sometimes you come back to. I guess what I think I heard tonight is that essentially there's no retail or rental units or that basically makes sense financially to the developer, as developers, and that it's only this affordable and assisted living mechanism that seems to generate enough revenue of interest for a significant scale development on your part. And I guess I feel that that's not necessarily what I'd like to see down there as a resident, whereas you're willing to put in the market and the other, but that's not what I would possibly say what I would like to see there for our downtown, although you have some rights to develop. And maybe, as the previous person said, just bounded by what you could do on the site there, because you're not doing something that, in my opinion, fits with what I would like to see down there. Except for the fact that, as Stephen said, whether there's the affordable housing angle, and whether you can find some convergence between the assisted and memory place where you could basically build in all of the affordable housing requirements and some. So that's maybe where you might find some common ground with affordable housing, at least, in a project that might serve the town. But otherwise, it sounds like you've limited the project definition to this affordable and assisted housing, and it's not really open to other issues about rental housing or other kind of things.
I'm sorry, I don't know any names, so you haven't spoken yet. Why don't you come in?
He's holding those things.
What's that?
He's with me.
I actually meant to ask this before, but I'm glad some other people went ahead, because the one question I kind of came into tonight with is, what is driving the June town meeting date? Because it does seem premature, given the lack of real specificity. This is starting to firm up, but there's all those things that people have articulated aren't done, that some on the select board have articulated aren't done. So who and what is driving that date? Why do we have to have that town meeting for this kind of stuff when we don't have these answers?
Yeah, no special town meeting has been scheduled for June.
Or been requested by
It was on the...
That was their presentation.
That's the response. The town gets to decide whether to have a special town meeting.
Okay, so nothing has been decided, because there was a point, I think, at which it was going to, some of the TIF at least was going to go on the warrant for May, but that was split off, correct? So there's been no decision from...
There was never a warrant article for TIF.
No, but there was discussion of it being, and then I had heard, at least at the January 17th meeting, that it was decided that it would that it should be broken apart and done later. And so what you're telling me is that there is no date for a special meeting.
There'll be a date when we're ready. I think that's the simple answer.
We've never seen a warrant article for TIF, and no special town meeting has been discussed or scheduled.
No, but
the only discussion, Neil, was that it was not, we did not put a warrant article on the May meeting, and nothing has been scheduled subsequently. What you saw here was a request from the developer.
I see, okay, because, I mean, we, as a Conservation Commission, there was some language around what that might look like as a warrant article was circulated, or the wording of what the agreement might be for a TIF. So if I'm sort of getting ahead of that, that's fine. So, but I just want to understand that from the select board perspective, there is no special town meeting scheduled.
That's what I just said.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Unclear. I have visual aids. There, if you could just slide down. Well, yeah, he'll hold it, but if you could just slide down. Use my fear. That's all right. So, I was glad to see finally some renderings, some elevations of this thing. But I'm surprised that the developer hasn't given us... Yeah, pick it up, and I wish it was bigger. I was hoping to actually do this on the screen, but I was told we only have 3 minutes. I'm surprised that the developer hasn't given us measured drawings yet of this. Using the dimensions of the property from the town, the assessor's maps, I scaled this thing out. I can do this. This one, which is, there now is saying the memory care, and this would be the assisted living, but it's the same footprint, at 34,000 square feet. 20,000 for this one right here. Just to get a sense, and I know a lot of people have a hard time visualizing things from drawings. To get a sense of what this is, look at the heritage over here, and look at what's being proposed here. And, if you would, what I did, this is from the developer's presentation. I haven't doctored anything other than I cut and pasted the heritage and put it over here. This is the scale of what we're going to have, as Craig said, at the front door of our town. And my last, again, from the developer's presentation, all I've done is reorient this so you can see this relative to the rest of downtown. I want everybody to look with your own eyes and just look at this here relative to everything else in town. If you move this down here, it covers the entire ball fields. If you slid it down here to the railroad tracks and Walgreens, and this is the fire station, it covers and smothers the rest of the downtown. This is going to be friggin' huge. So I really want to ask the question, there may be, because this is in the PUD, there's very little we can do to prevent this, but why we should be greasing the skids for the developer to do even more here than he can do by right is beyond me. So,
thanks, John.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I think the hardest part about this project is that what's being asked is for people to consider really two separate issues. And there's the issue of what do we want to see on the property, and then there's the issue of do we have any interest in having a downtown water and sewer district. And the problem is that there are two issues that require everyone to kind of educate themselves on, and a lot of people are really busy. I know it's taken me time to get my own education of what is going on. The fact that the ballpark is already a septic field, and so we know it can be a septic field. And there's things that kind of trying to understand, well, what's already in place? Well, already, you go to C&L Frosty, you cannot go to the bathroom there with your kids. You are walking over to Heritage. There's one place to go to a bathroom. This plan, whether that's a good one or another plan on what's being developed, is it that's the right one, is still up in the air. I am disappointed about trying to figure out how to deal with the affordable housing situation, but I also see that there's a struggle of the TIF question really is asking, and it's really, the Town Center Water Options Committee has been studying this for a long time and saying, okay, we do have all these overlapping, there's something going to be needing to be done, and so this is potentially an opportunity to have help in creating that system, which the town is going to have to eventually get to. So that has to be decided. And then there's a decision of what's actually built on this property that has to be decided, and they're not, and the problem is they kind of impact one another, but to a degree they are separate problems to be wrestled with. As far as scale, I mean, everything feels imposing, but then when you drive by 59 North Main and you think about those houses, now that it's taking shape, it's hard until you see it, and it's really hard for all of us. I know I drive around a lot and look at, well, what does 2 stories look like? What does 3 stories look like? Abbey Road, if you look at an aerial of house, I mean, that was a small piece of property, and I couldn't have imagined what that would look like, but now that it's done, it kind of sits in among the trees and the colors worked out. So there are ways with good design. Andrew's not the developer on this project currently, but he does have good design, and so if he is the one, then I think we'd be lucky to work with Andrew as opposed to some other developers that are in the area. So there's a lot of things that are not known, and I do think June's kind of on the early side, but I kind of ask everyone to, maybe you have to separate the 2 issues and realize that there are 2 separate issues. There's what's going on, what do we want to see on that land? As John Higley said, there's things that can be done by right without, as long as they meet the setbacks, as long as they meet the building requirements. There's really no input that anybody here has on what can be done. There's things that can be done on our property without input, so that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Redboard, 8 Green Lane. I'm also a commercial architect, so I create these drawings all day long for a living. One thing that I would point out though, if you look at the size of the heritage and the size of the required parking for such a place, that none of these drawings show anywhere close to the amount of parking that would actually be required for a facility of this size. Nowhere close. So just something to consider, something this large would require much more parking, which would require, I don't know what the requirement for parking for such a memory care facility would be.
Wouldn't that be a fact that we need to know?
Yes, well, I don't know if it's a memory care. I'm just talking about for the marketplace. So, hold on. Pause. Just on the marketplace itself, you could use this parking right here just for the marketplace. So that leaves it takes away half the parking that you're showing, and that is a 9,000 square foot piece, which goes to really my question, which is how did we go from, and this is not a question to you, but more of a question to the zoning board or the select board, how did we go from a 2,500 square foot market, which it's zoned commercially for, to this 9,000 square feet market, or 15,000 square feet, which I see on the slides up there today. So if someone on the zoning board could help me clarify where that move from 25, which seems very adequate for a town this size for a market. A 2,500 square foot market would be great in this downtown.
It's funny though, because nobody's been willing to build one for 20 years since that provision went into the zoning. I would ask if Mr. could answer your question about the parking, because you did accuse him of not putting enough parking on that plan, and I'd like to hear what he has to say.
So, retail by
Andrew, can you come up to the front? I'm sorry. Thank you.
So retail by zoning, and I believe maybe Gino can confirm this, but I believe it's 4 per 1,000. Well, 4 spaces per 100 square feet, I think.
5.
4 per 1,000.
4 per 1,000. Okay. So there is enough parking for the market. The assisted living generates much lower parking requirements than housing, where housing is usually 1.5, 2, or even 2.5 sometimes, if it's not used in transit.
It's like 300 parking spaces.
Yeah. So assisted living usually does it around, I believe it's 0.5 per bed. And this is all in standards that you can look at the parking requirements. And we also have parking underneath half of the building as well. So when you look at the site plan, you might not see all the surface parking. There is tuck under parking as well.
So that first story of the 2.5 stories is parking?
Yes. So
really you're only proposing 1.5 stories of space? Or are you now making it 4.5 stories?
Yeah. So all this parking right here, it's probably 120 spaces. That's for the assisted living and memory care. Underneath here, there's all
like 3/4 of it. of a spot instead of 1.5 per unit.
But this isn't housing, this is assisted living and memory care. The people staying here aren't driving.
Employees?
What are parking requirements?
For their families?
What are parking requirements for something like that?
It's much, much lower than 1.75.
Speak to the crowd, please.
Susie?
Those are my thoughts.
Back to this one. Thank you, John.
Should I hold it for you?
Great.
Susie?
Okay.
I think Andrew still has something to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we have verified that this is actually even more parking than is needed on the plan. We can verify that through a study, a parking study that we have and post it online. So.
But does the zoning board have an answer for the 2,500 to the 9,000?
It's the planning board, and I think you heard earlier this evening that there have been ongoing presentations, discussions with the town about what it's looking for. But I don't, John, does the planning board want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can, as mentioned, our planned unit development, PUD zoning, has a limitation of 2,500 square feet. It's never been used. And in the past, we've suggested to the town and gotten majority vote, but not 2/3 vote, to change it to 6,000. I think one time we tried 8,000. That's because, like the Dover Market, the Bacon Street Market and Natick are examples of small neighborhood grocery stores that are around 6,000 to 7,000 in that range. So that's the reason we've thought about changing it. It's never been used, and similar grocery stores are in that 6,000 to 7,000 range. So that's the reason for why 2,500 square feet is not a viable size for a local grocery store. Thanks.
Susie?
A couple of points. Zoning is something that we do as a community in a very considered way. And someone used to stand, I think it might have been Betsy Johnson, used to stand up at every town meeting and say, when there was a zoning article coming up, she would say, you get what you zone for. And what we zoned for does not really resemble what we're talking about today. And in fact, this is a reactive exercise. We are reacting to someone else's desires, wishes, and wants, not our own. And I guess when I saw this, I thought, aha, this is the heritage, this is the addition. And in fact, the planning board's own survey a few years ago, only 1/3 of people in town said that they wanted the downtown to get any bigger.
Thank you. This has been a good discussion, a lot of good questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did want to go.
Oh, I thought you were just...
No.
He wasn't with me.
Lauren's happy to know that.
I was just thinking about the idea of separating, the development portion from the water and the sewer portion. And it just feels to me that if we weren't proposing to put 200 or 300 people downtown on this property, it seems like we have to put that many people downtown on the property to try and pay for the waste and water. But yet, if we were never doing that, would we be sitting here trying to put waste and water downtown? I realize that there are some concerns, and I know our overlays are pretty strict, but we certainly would have survived. And if we did the project for what fit and taxed right away, and we raised our own money, we probably would not choose to spend that money on waste and water. So therefore, we really don't need to put 200 or 300 people on a postage stamp to try and pay for it. So it just doesn't, just separating the two, it's just, this town is not going to put a waste and water treatment plant if it wasn't for the development.
Terrific. Thank you. I encourage everyone, we talked at the beginning of the evening about all these upcoming meetings and discussions. I encourage everyone to...
Is it too late?
I'm sorry?
Okay.
Do you move to close?
I would encourage everyone to come to all the meetings that we've talked about. There were lots, this is a very big project. There were lots of terrific questions. So thank everyone for the civil discussion. And the board during the session need to adjourn, so I would like to...